She doesn't represent the brand. Brent Halley said it to the table. Not quietly, not regretfully, the way someone might say it if they were trying to soften a blow. But clearly, with his chin lifted and his glass of Bordeaux halfway to his mouth, as though he were reading a line off a menu. The dinner was supposed to celebrate the Mace Group's third consecutive year of record revenue. 60 guests at long rectangular tables in the private dining room of Auberge Saint-Pierre, Montreal's finest. Candles, burgundy linens, the kind of silverware that had weight to it. Cora Vidal was sitting 2 seats down from Brent when he said it, and she felt the sentence the way you feel the ground shift before you understand what that means. He wasn't looking at her. That was what made it worse. He was looking at the clients across the table, smiling as though he'd just delivered excellent news, one hand resting casually on the back of Simone Laval's chair. Simone, who was slim and polished and had joined the operations team 4 months ago, and had been acting strangely formal with Cora ever since. "Brent and I have been together for about 6 weeks, Simone said, as if filling in a legal document. The table did not erupt. It went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when everyone is deciding simultaneously whether to pretend something didn't happen. 60 people pretended, very loudly. Cora set down her fork. She did not throw it. She did not cry. She had trained herself out of crying in public the way she had trained herself out of ordering dessert, methodically, privately, over years of small defeats that had never felt dramatic enough to call defeats. She reached for her water glass with both hands, which were shaking slightly, and looked at the tablecloth. 3 years. 3 years of Brent's hand on her lower back at work events, warm and possessive, in a way that always made her feel like she'd earned something. 3 years of him saying things like, "We should get you into a Pilates routine," and "That dress would be so much more flattering if, and you have such a pretty face, Cora. You'd be stunning if you just," followed by whatever sentence he never quite finished. She had always assumed the unfinished sentence was kindness. Now she understood it had been a condition. "I think Cora understands," Brent said, turning to her at last with an expression that was almost patient. "You and I weren't heading anywhere serious. This is better, you know, a cleaner arrangement." The room held its breath. Then someone moved. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately, with the unhurried authority of a man who had never once in his life needed to hurry. Kieran Mace rose from his seat at the head of the table. He was not a man who drew attention by doing dramatic things. He drew attention the way a fault line draws attention, by existing, by the particular quality of stillness he carried, by the fact that the 11 people closest to him instinctively straightened when he stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He walked the full length of the table without looking at Brent Halley at all. He stopped beside Cora, laid the jacket across her shoulders without asking, and looked down at her with eyes that were the color of deep water and about as readable. "Come," that was all he said. Cora stared up at him. She had worked for the Mace Group for 2.5 years. She had processed payroll for 11 locations, reconciled accounts worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, and filed paperwork that she'd been specifically told never to mention to anyone who didn't already know what the Mace Group actually was. She had seen Kieran Mace exactly 6 times in that period. He had never spoken to her directly. She started. "Come," he said again, the same word, the same tone, as if he were simply confirming something he already knew to be true. Behind her, she heard Brent begin, "This is not," and then go quiet. She did not look back to see why. She stood. The jacket settled around her shoulders. She followed Kieran Mace toward the door, and the room parted for him, the way water parts for something moving beneath the surface, silently and completely, without discussion. The car was already at the entrance. Of course it was. The driver didn't speak, neither did Kieran for the first several minutes, and the silence was nothing like Cora expected silence to be after the most humiliating night of her life. It wasn't heavy, it was simply present, the way a room is present. Something to exist inside, not something to fight. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. He looked at the city passing outside the window. "I know. He's your director of operations." He was. She turned her head slowly. Was. Kieran offered nothing further. Cora looked back at her hands in her lap. She was still wearing his jacket, which smelled like cedar, and something slightly colder, like air that had come from somewhere far away. "I don't understand why you were even at that dinner." She heard herself say it and wasn't sure why. It came out softer than she meant. "You're never at the Montreal location." "I come when I need to." She almost laughed, except she wasn't sure what she would have been laughing at. "You came to see him do that?" "No." Something shifted in his expression. "Not much. I didn't know he was going to do that." "Did you know about Simone?" A pause. "Yes." Cora absorbed this. Outside, the lights of the old port moved past like slow-falling sparks. She thought about how she had spent 3 years believing she was loved in the way people with patience love difficult things, carefully, at a cost, and had never once stopped to ask herself why the person loving her always seemed to be paying a toll. "He told me I was lucky," she said, not to Kieran specifically, to the window, or to no one. "Toward the beginning," he said. "You're lucky I don't care about that sort of thing." Meaning she gestured vaguely at herself. Kieran's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. "I actually thanked him for it," she said, with the particular flatness of someone who has just recognized something true that they wish weren't. "I thanked him for not caring about my body." She shook her head once. "For 3 years I thought that was what love looked like. Someone willing to overlook something about you." The car stopped in front of a building she recognized. The Mace Group's private office suite on Rue Saint-Jacques, not her apartment, though she noticed this only distantly. "Inside," Kieran said. She looked at him. "Tea," he said, which was not an explanation but was somehow sufficient. The suite was warm and quiet, and smelled like old wood and something brewing. A woman Cora had never seen appeared from a back room with a tray and disappeared again without being asked. Cora sat on a leather sofa that cost more than her car and held a cup of tea with both hands and talked. She hadn't planned to. She wasn't the kind of person who talked. She was the kind of person who noticed things, who knew which prep cook had a bad knee and left a stool near the reach-in freezer for them, who remembered that the overnight dishwasher at the Westmount location took his coffee with 2 sugars and no milk, and had been doing it for 11 years. She knew everyone's details and shared none of her own. But something about Kieran Mace's silence was not the silence of someone waiting for her to finish. It was the silence of someone who had already decided to stay regardless of what she said. "It started very small," she said. "He noticed what I ordered. Then he noticed how I dressed. Then he started sending me articles, workout routines. Just thought of you when I saw this. That kind of thing." Kieran sat across from her, elbows on his knees, saying nothing. "I started running," she said. "And then when I wasn't running enough, in his opinion, I started apologizing for not running enough. Which is," she stopped. "I apologized for not exercising the right amount. Do you understand how far gone you have to be to think that's a reasonable thing to feel sorry for?" "No," Kieran said. "I don't." She looked at him. "No, you wouldn't." She meant it simply, not as a criticism. He was a man who, from everything she had observed in 2.5 years, had never once apologized for existing. "There were comments about my size," she said. "Not angry ones, just," she searched for the word, "practical. Like he was referencing a logistical problem. You'd photograph better at events if," Clients notice these things, Cora. I'm telling you this because I want you to succeed. She wrapped both hands tighter around the cup. I believed him, every time. Because he said it like he cared. The room held this quietly. I stopped ordering food I actually wanted, she said. For 2 years, I sat at dinners and ordered the smallest thing on the menu and convinced myself I wasn't hungry. A long pause. Tonight I was sitting at that table thinking about the duck confit, because I hadn't had duck confit in 2 years, and then he said what he said, and I realized. She exhaled slowly. I gave up duck confit for a man who was sleeping with someone else. It was such a specific kind of grief that she almost smiled at it. Kieran reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He'd retrieved it somewhere between the car and the suite, and removed something small. He set it on the table between them. Cora looked at it. A sticky note, yellow, her handwriting. Night crew finished at 2:30. Nobody left them anything to eat. There's a deli tray in the second fridge. Please make sure they get it before you leave. CV. She stared at it for a long moment. Where did you get that? Westmount location, 13 months ago. He looked at it, then at her. I was doing a walkthrough, found it on the fridge. You kept it. I kept it. She had no idea what to do with that information. Her throat had tightened in a way that made speech complicated. It's a note about a deli tray, she managed. It's a note from someone who finished an 11-hour shift and then stayed to make sure people who weren't her responsibility had something to eat. He said this without inflection, as though he were reading from a file. At 2:30 in the morning, when no one was watching, Cora looked at the note and could not speak. I know your name, Kieran said. Before I know most people's names in my own organization. I know that you thank the cleaning crew when you leave a site. I know that you've flagged discrepancies in 3 location accounts that the managers themselves hadn't caught. I know you brought soup to the receptionist at the Saint Laurent location for a week when she had a chest cold, and that she cried when she told me about it 6 months later and had no idea you'd done it without being asked. Cora put down the cup. She needed both hands free for reasons she couldn't explain. I also know, he said, that the man you spent 3 years with never once saw any of that. He saw a body that didn't meet his specifications. That was the sum of his attention. The tears came quietly, not the violent, shattering kind she'd half expected to feel tonight. The slow kind, like something draining rather than breaking. It doesn't matter, she said, and heard herself say it, and knew instantly that it was a lie she had been telling herself so long it had learned to sound like the truth. It matters, Kieran said. You don't know me. I've been paying attention for over a year. She looked at him. His face was not soft. It was not the face of a man who said comforting things easily. It was the face of a man who stated facts and let them stand on their own weight. Why? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the sticky note between them, as though it contained the answer, and he was deciding whether to read it aloud. Because you are the only person I have ever observed, he said finally, who treats every person in a room as though they are equally worth treating well, not because someone is watching, not because there is anything to gain. A pause. That is not a common thing. Cora could not find a single word. And I thought, he said quietly, that someone should eventually notice. 3 weeks passed. The Mace Group did not announce what had happened to Brent Halley. In the world that Kieran Mace operated in, departures did not require announcements. Cora returned to work. She ordered the duck confit for lunch on her first day back and ate every bite at her desk without apology. The footage from the dinner had found its way onto social media because it always does. Someone's phone, someone's instinct, someone's idea of entertainment. The clips spread with dramatic captions and speculation about the composed man in the charcoal suit who had walked the full length of a table without once looking at the man he was leaving behind. Cora did not watch any of it. She had been there. She had been there. That was enough. Kieran did not overwhelm her. He appeared when their work naturally brought them together. A budget review, a logistics call, a walk-through at the plateau location that happened to coincide with her site visit. He sent a message the morning after the dinner, asking whether she had slept. He did not expect a reply. She replied anyway. She had slept better than she expected. He sent back 2 words, good. It was, she realized, the most uncomplicated expression of relief she had ever received from anyone. The Mace Foundation's annual charity auction was held at the Windsor Ballroom on a Friday in November. When Montreal had gone slate grey and cold, and the city had that particular quality of beautiful austerity that it only gets in the weeks before the first real snow. Cora had coordinated the event logistics, the silent auction tables, the seating arrangement, the dietary requirements for 240 guests. She moved through the ballroom that evening, the way she always moved through rooms she'd built. Quietly, efficiently, knowing where every chair was, where every exit led. She was checking the placement of the dessert stations when she saw Brent Halley come through the main doors. He was dressed carefully. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed. She had 12 seconds to decide how she felt about this. She felt, and this surprised her, entirely clear. He found her at the 3rd table. He looked genuinely contrite, which she knew by now was one of the 2 expressions he'd perfected, the other being reasonable. Cora, he put a hand on her arm. She stepped back, not sharply, just enough. Don't. He withdrew his hand. I wanted to apologize. I know, she said. You've had 3 weeks to realize what standing next to Kieran Mace means for someone's career, and now you want back in. She said it without anger, the way she said things she was certain of. I'm not angry at you, Brent, but I want you to understand that I see this. I see exactly what this is. Something flickered in his face. He hadn't expected that sentence. You don't have to, he began. You didn't come back because you missed me, she said. You came back because you finally understood who I work for. That's not an apology. That's a strategy. She held his gaze and did not look away. You should leave. He did not leave. He took a step forward instead, and his expression changed. Colder, something that had been waiting beneath the reasonable face for a long time. I made you, he said, low enough that it was only for her. You were nobody when I found you, a bookkeeper counting someone else's money. I am the only reason you got any visibility in this organization at all. Before Cora could respond, she became aware of a shift in the room. Not a sound, a shift in weight. In temperature, the way rooms change when something certain enters them. Kieran was already there. She hadn't seen him move. That was a quality of his she had begun to understand. He appeared where he needed to be without theatrics, without announcement. He did not stand between her and Brent. He stood beside her, exactly as he had at the dinner table, one hand in his pocket, his eyes on Brent with an attention that was perfectly calm and utterly without mercy. She flagged the errors in your Laval accounts before your own team did, Kieran said, without raising his voice. She corrected your operational budget projections twice in 18 months. She trained your assistant without being asked, and has never once taken credit for it. He tilted his head slightly. You did not make her, you failed repeatedly to see her. Brent's color changed. You'll leave this event, Kieran said, tonight, and you'll understand that this is the last conversation you will have with anyone connected to my organization, at any level. You can't. I can, Kieran said simply, completely. Security arrived with the quiet efficiency of people who had been waiting for a signal that had just been given. Brent looked at Cora once more, a last chance look, the kind that is really a demand wearing a question's clothing. She met it without flinching. She thought about 2 years of skipped desserts and apologies for things that were never wrong in the first place, and she felt nothing except the clean, unremarkable sensation of a door closing on a room she would never go back to. He left. The ballroom exhaled around her, conversations resuming. The string quartet picking up where they'd left off, glasses being refilled. The Mace Foundation raised a record amount for children's literacy programs that night. Nobody mentioned what had happened in the corner by the dessert table. Later, when the auction had wound down and the guests had thinned to a last few dozen, Cora found herself standing at one of the tall windows overlooking Dominion Square, holding a cup of coffee someone had quietly pressed into her hands without being asked. Kieran came to stand beside her. Not close, close enough. "You spoke first," he said. "I know." I wasn't going to interrupt. "I know that too." She looked at the snow that had started to fall outside, fine and unhurried, beginning to catch on the stone below. "I've spent a long time waiting for someone else to tell me what I'm worth." She turned slightly toward him. "I think I decided it myself about 11 minutes in, when I told him I could see exactly what he was doing." A pause. That felt different. Different how? Like something I owned. He looked at the square below, where the snow was beginning to settle in the crevices of the old stone, and something in his expression settled too. Not warm, exactly, because warmth wasn't a word that fit his face, but certain. The particular certainty of something long held being confirmed. "I have a question," he said. She waited. "I have asked very little of you," he said. "I intend to continue asking very little of you, but I would like to ask once." Cora turned to face him fully. "Would you consider," he said, "being in a room with me more often, intentionally?" She almost smiled. "Is that how you ask people things?" "It's how I ask you." She looked at the shape of the sticky note in his breast pocket. Still there, after everything. She had spent 3 years shrinking, ordering less, eating less, taking up less space, apologizing for the space she couldn't eliminate. She had thanked a man for tolerating her existence and called it love, and believed it, deeply, for longer than she could now comfortably look at. Kieran Mace had kept a sticky note she'd written at 2:30 in the morning about a deli tray. Kept it for 13 months, carried it to Montreal in his jacket pocket, because it had told him something about who she was when no one important was watching. "Yes," she said. He didn't smile. He rarely did, but his hand moved from his pocket and opened toward her. Not insistently, not dramatically, just open, and she put her hand in it, and the snow continued to fall over Dominion Square, quiet and unhurried, and neither of them felt the need to say anything further. 8 months later, Cora stood at the head of the main boardroom in Mace Group's headquarters and presented the consolidated financial review for all 14 locations to a room of 12 people, 11 of whom were older than her, and one of whom, at the far end of the table, was watching her with the particular quiet attention she had learned to recognize as his version of pride. She stood with her notes on one side and a coffee on the other, and spoke clearly, and without apology about numbers that would have made most people nervous. And when a senior partner interrupted to question her margin analysis, she answered him precisely and without deflecting, explained exactly which quarter he had failed to account for, and moved on. When the meeting ended and the room emptied, Kieran remained seated. "You didn't defer to him," he said. His question was based on Q2, without the Q3 correction. "I told him that." "You told him he was wrong." "He was wrong." Kieran looked at her for a long moment. "6 months ago, you would have apologized before correcting him." She picked up her coffee. "6 months ago, I would have agreed with him, fixed it quietly afterward, and told no one." He stood, picked up his jacket, stopped beside her. "Cora." She looked up. He reached into the breast pocket and set the sticky note on top of her presentation folder. Her own handwriting, slightly worn at the fold from 13 months of being carried. She looked at it, then at him. "I don't need to keep it anymore," he said. "You don't need me to remind you." She picked it up, held it in both hands, looked at the words she had written at 2:30 in the morning, in a kitchen that wasn't even her location, for people whose names she had learned simply because it seemed worth knowing. A tired, invisible woman making sure someone else had enough to eat before she went home. She didn't mourn that woman. She recognized her. "I'll keep it," she said, and slid it into her own pocket. Kieran's hand, when it reached for hers, was steady and unhurried, the same as it had always been. And she held it the way you hold something that has long since stopped feeling like a choice and simply become what is true.